Okay, now that the broadcast is going, I'll go ahead and do a screen share for this PowerPoint on my grading guide for both my composition and my lit classes. And you guys will have, I'm doing this in an honors class, we'll be doing a literature course next spring. Let me get this to full screen. Okay, so grading guide for composition and literature courses. This is essentially, I use standard shorthand for most of my comments, but not everybody's aware of what shorthand means. So the idea of the handout that I gave you in this PowerPoint for online students is to provide you with explanations of my shorthand, also to point out some common errors that we can avoid in paper writing, as well as some links that you can go to look up definitions of things that might be issues on your paper. So we'll just start at the top of the handout. If I write MS on your paper, it means more specific. Specificity in writing is very important. It's always better to be specific about a few things than general about many. I say that in all my classes, but it really rings true. Don't try to do too much. Do what you're doing really well. Comma splice. This is a big one for freshman writers, but other writers as well. A comma splice is where you put a comma between two clauses, whether independent or dependent, and don't have the proper linking word and, but, so, and so on. So basically you have two sentences that are separated with a comma instead of a period. There's a more detailed explanation on the online writing lab at Purdue University. WC doesn't mean water closet, it means word choice. Generally speaking, this is going for, but the word that you use isn't quite right. Sometimes people get a little bit overzealous with the thesaurus. The thesaurus is hard to say, and don't quite use the right word. You know, choosing the proper words for your context is also on the online writing lab at Purdue. And I'm not clicking these up here, so my in-class isn't seeing it. All right, next slide. Sentence fragment. I do get this a lot because I think students will often write how they speak, and spoken language is often in sentence fragments, but you need to have a complete sentence. Subject, object, verb, at minimum, needs to be in that sentence. If I write AWK, it means the sentence is awkward. Chances are the sentence is grammatically correct, but it sounds funny, or the syntax, the way the words are put together, isn't quite right. So if I put AWK, that means awkward. Run-on sentence. You can look that up, but it's basically a sentence that has too much in it. You know, you have a subject, object, verb, and then you have a subject and verb in the sentence as well, and it doesn't connect. I'm not a sentence diagrammer myself, but grammatically, it's not sound. So that's what RO means. Now, if I have a caret, and this is usually applies to my brick and mortar classes on something that I'm grading by hand, if I put the little arrow up, it means there's a word missing. Proofread. I like to point this out, and it's actually pointed out later in the presentation as well, because it's very important. I think some students get in a rush to finish, because it is satisfying to get a draft done, and you just want to turn it in and get it over with. But spell check is not sufficient, okay? You have to check that you're using the right words. You don't have any homonym errors. What's a homonym? That's a word that sounds the same but spelled differently and means something differently. Two, and two, T-O, T-W-O, T-O-O, there. The bane of the social media existence. There, and your. Anyway, spell check is not sufficient. Now, I do expect you to spell check. If I see incorrectly spelled words because you didn't do spell check, that's an issue as well. if I put SP on your paper, it means a word spelled incorrectly. Usually that's one of those homonym errors I was talking about. This next one applies primarily to hand graded work, but if I have two arrows, inverting a phrase, if there's a line through it, that means cut the word or phrase. Now I can do that on the online grading. And in my composition classes, it tends to be on the flash fiction essay in the summary section, because I cross out everything that's over 7 sentences in that summary. So if it's crossed out, usually I'll give an explanation as to why, but it just means you don't need that word or that sentence. VT, verb tense, this means one of two things. Either your subject and verb don't agree. Let's see. Something like, oh, I can't, why am I blanking on it? Well, he went to the store, you would say that if it's past tense, or you wouldn't say he goed to the store or something like that. But it can also apply to mixing up your verb tense in terms of past and present tense. I prefer you use present tense in your essays, but if you use past tense, it's fine as long as you're consistent. If you shouldn't be jumping back and forth between present and past tense. B/C means because. Texting is kind of taking care of that abbreviation. This is primarily in a handwritten note, but if I have the backwards P with 2 lines, that means you need a new paragraph there, or I might be writing a note, this paragraph needs work, and I'll just abbreviate it because it's easier. Oops. Rough transition. This means that the transition from one paragraph to the next needs some work, and there's a link to some tips on that. Really, you should think about the paragraphs in your essay. I like to use the analogy of the Florida Keys. What connects the Florida Keys together? Does anybody know? Could you drive to Key West if you wanted to? I see some nods. Okay, good. I'm going to start throwing espresso out to you guys. Okay, how can you drive to Key West? Don't overthink it. Yeah, there's a bridge or causeway. They're an island chain that are connected together with a road. Think of that road as your transition, and the islands are a paragraph. There is a connection from one to the next. It's not like the Hawaiian Islands that are separate islands. Your paragraphs can't be separate thoughts that are just thrown together into an essay. You have to smoothly transition from one idea to the next, and that's what paragraph transitions do. And a transition can either be the last sentence of one paragraph or the first sentence of the next paragraph. That's why I say in the thesis PowerPoint, your thesis is going to be the last or second to last sentence of your introduction, because you may need a transition sentence after your thesis. Okay, questions before I move on? All right, some tips on papers, some common errors that I see. Now, this list of explanations is not exhaustive, but it is a list of common errors I see in my courses. To see my comments in the margins of an assignment, go to the Grades tab, click on the assignment, and on the right of the screen, you'll be able to select View Comments. I forgot what the icon looks like, but it'll be on the right side of the screen. Now, one thing I want to note, a couple things actually. One, when I grade, I don't put a note for every highlight. I'm trying to make my grading a little bit more efficient. So primarily for grammatical errors, I'm just highlighting them, especially if I've pointed it out before. So if you need further explanation, please shoot me an email or a Canvas message and point out where it is. Now, if you leave a note in the paper, I don't get a notification of it. So if you don't let me know that you put your own notes in the margins, which Canvas allows you to do, or allows you to ask questions, you got to notify me that that note's there, or otherwise I'm not going to know about it. All right. Also, if you revise your paper, I'll give you a video with an in-depth explanation of what you can work on with the paper, but you will have to request that video. Okay, so the first item on there is you got to prove your points. For this class, you guys are pretty good on the first paper, but there were spots where people could use a little bit more explanation. The reader's not going to believe what you say automatically just because you say it. You must prove your points through detailed, specific examples and or research. In the case of the first couple papers in my composition classes, it's primarily through the work you're discussing. The thesis is your paper. Every point in every paragraph, even every sentence of a paper must back up your thesis. If you go off on a tangent or don't follow the thesis, it affects the potency and readability of your argument. Okay, so keeping a focus throughout is important. That's why I have an entire lecture just on one sentence of your paper, the thesis statement. This one always puzzles me because you would think, it's like following the assignment is kind of like following a recipe. You know, you wouldn't, get a recipe for cake and throw a bunch of shrimp and kale and I don't know, Rocky Mountain oysters into the batter and expect it to taste like a chocolate cake completely. Well, the same thing goes with instructions on a paper assignment. You need to follow the assignment. Read the assignment very carefully. It's hard for your essay to succeed if you only answer half the assignment. Also pay attention to the format requirements on the assignment page, also in the syllabus, which includes the minimum word count. I've included a link to MLA formatting in part of this PowerPoint. But I see some people kind of shaking their heads, but you would think people would follow the assignment, but it does occasionally happen that people don't. Proofreading is important. I've talked about this at length, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but it's a good idea to read your essays out loud if you're not in the practice of doing that. You might have to sequester yourself in a closet or something like that if you're embarrassed, but it forces you to read every word of the paper. And so you can catch those little errors that your eyes kind of naturally glaze over on the screen. So it's a good idea to read your essays out loud. And if you do have an issue with proofreading, I encourage you to go to that link on the OWL Purdue because it gives you kind of a good system for how to proofread your paper. Conversational writing style. This is usually an issue on the first paper. Most people correct it. Remember that you're writing a formal essay, not having a conversation with the reader. Avoid colloquial terms, slang, and other aspects of conversational language. I'll talk about this next, but the second person's a big part of it. But we want to use, we want to avoid contractions. You would say cannot instead of can't. You would say do not instead of don't. And the like. You wouldn't use a slang term in your paper. That's why we're in this class, is partially to get practice and to learn the difference between spoken language and written language, okay? Now this really applies just to the brick and mortar classes, but take notes in class. Any phrase that I say into your papers, or when you start working on your own papers, or this is how this relates to your paper, you're responsible for that. You need to take notes in class. And you'll be accountable for it in your writing. Write it down so you can reference it when you are writing. Also, you're accountable for all things that I write on the board. This seems simple again, but some people need a gentle reminder. Also, if you take notes on it in class, you're going to remember it better. You're not going to go through that thing where, oh, he said something about this, but I don't remember what it is. Try to take notes so you can get long-term memory. Okay, second person. Using you, your, yourself, y'all. I don't know if I've ever seen y'all in an essay. We should avoid the second person because it can put off an audience by addressing them directly. In addition, the second person is much more common in spoken language and makes a written essay seem conversational, something we want to build toward avoiding. Why is this important? Well, part of the reason you're in this class is to prepare you for other classes, but it's also to prepare you for a job in the future. If you use a conversational writing style with slang, you don't capitalize your I's, you use the second person all over the place, you use exclamation points like they're going out of style, your boss is going to take you less seriously, okay? Written communication needs to be clear and formal in most cases. Now, granted, if you've got a friendly relationship with your boss, that's different. Audience matters in writing. But as a general rule, we need to learn how to write formally, and part of that is getting rid of the second person. Now, on the first paper, your grammar and mechanics grade only goes down to 70% if you use the second person. But by the third paper, you're getting a failing grade in grammar and mechanics for using the second person. That's why for this group paper you guys are working on, isn't necessarily all my classes, so don't panic. You need to proofread it as a group paper because one paragraph with the second person takes the whole group down. All right, formatting. You can find the proper way to format your paper. Here there's a very long and detailed explanation on the Al Purdue. It's even a good PDF file that you can print out that has what an MLA paper should be formatted like and explanations for each thing, okay? And it looks like this. Now the basics of it, one, Times New Roman 12-point font. That's the font that I require in this class. In future classes it may differ. Now, in terms of MLA formatting, last name and page number, same font and size as the rest of the paper. Your name, instructor name, class, and the date. Title in the middle, there's no extra spaces between the name stuff and the title or the title and the start of the paper. Make sure you're indenting the first line of each paragraph. Those are the basics, but I encourage you to go to that link and look at the formatting. I also have the basic formatting guidelines on my syllabus, and I have formatting guidelines on each paper assignment. So make sure you're paying attention to all of those. Okay, now this doesn't apply to every class. If you're watching this in a literature class, I don't have time to revise your papers, but we do in composition. Okay, so the requirements for revision. First and foremost, it has to be 90% of the word count. So if, for example, the paper is 1,000 words, it has to be at least 900 to be able to revise it. You must either make an appointment with me to talk in my office about your paper, or from me going over the things you need to work on. Then you also, in addition to writing a good revision of your paper, getting a video from me or visiting me in my office, you also have to write a 200 to 300 word author's note that explains your revision process. This is fairly informal and may be written in the first person, but I want you to know the following. You aren't limited to these things, but this is a good start. What you took out, put in, moved around, and why you did that. How you changed your thought process. Outside help did you get with revision? Think of this as a journal or a discussion question where the topic is, this is how I revised my paper. Okay. Oh man, that thought just flew away. Oh, this process, writing the author's note, may seem arbitrary, but it's not busy work. What I want you to do in the revision process, both with my feedback and with the author's note, is to think about how you revise your papers, with the thought of you won't need to do the revision later. If you start analyzing your process for revision, look for ways to improve it. That will help you in the future not have to revise papers. Or if you're writing a paper that can't be revised, then you're going to do a better job on that final draft. Okay, a couple of final thoughts. The best thing you can do to help out your scores in this course, or really any course, is to read the comments or feedback your instructor puts on the paper. You're going to be reading it online in Canvas. Again, Grades tab, click on the assignment, and there's a link to the comments. I do expect in all of my classes for your writing to improve as the semester goes along. So, first paper, just a good example, is the second person. The first paper is 70% on your grammar and mechanics. By the third paper, it's a failing grade. I expect you to learn from past mistakes and not make them again, okay? So there'll be less tolerance for repeated mistakes. This is, specifically applies, or I wouldn't say specifically, but primarily applies to composition classes. Use your instructor as a resource. Don't guess about what you need to do on an essay. Please ask me. Even if you're not planning on revising your paper, but you have a question about my comments, please ask me. Probably the best way to do it is to go into those comments on Canvas, type up your questions in the margins, and then email me to notify me that you put those comments in the margins so I can go look at them and I can answer them. It's probably the best way to do things, all right? But utilize me as a resource to get better. All right, any questions on all this stuff? Yes, no, maybe so. All righty, let me go ahead and turn off the video and we will move on. Thank you for listening.